Sophia, I think I've scared them all away.
It looks like we have about 20 students so far.
Well, there we go. Okay.
Yeah, I think we can probably get started.
I was looking in the wrong place.
Oh, gotcha. Were you looking at the panelists?
The purchase, yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I'm like, there's nobody here.
Yeah, no, we got about 20 attendees so far. So I think we're good to get started anytime.
Fantastic. All right. Well, good day, everyone. Sorry, I was looking at the wrong list and I thought nobody was here. I'm glad to see you all joining. Fantastic. My name is Craig. I'm an instructor with ExitCertified. We are one of the training partners for AWS in North America. I've been delivering the AWS material for, I was just thinking about it, about 7 years now, maybe a little more. And as an AWS partner, of course, we are eager to offer you whatever elements you need for getting your training needs satisfied. We, along with AWS, present these Discovery Day topics for different topics within AWS, talk about different aspects of things that might be of interest to customers and give you a taste of what some of the material will look like and some of the interactions will look like. Now I'm seeing a hand up by somebody. You can put items in the chat. We don't have shared audio today. It's going to be a one-way street, if you will. But if you've got questions or things, I'm going to try to keep an eye on the chat as well as we move through our materials. All right. So again, welcome in. This is our Discovery Day to talk a bit about what AWS has to offer to help us if we are looking for our initial migration into AWS. And of course, part of that initial journey is the planning, the identifying of needs and shortcomings, and we're going to highlight some of those elements. Now, the title you see says large-scale migrations. If we're talking hundreds of applications, move your entire architecture into AWS. That is kind of the focus, really, of the tool set and the planning process. But to be honest, if you've got a smaller subset of items you're looking to bring into the cloud, the logic is still the same. The concepts are still the same. And frankly, it probably means you can do it a little bit quicker than what we would identify for a very large scale, corporate changing implementation of these elements here. So the basics, it starts out really with, hey, why are we thinking of moving to the cloud? And there's lots of drivers for why a company, a department, an enterprise might look to move to the cloud. These are some of the common ones listed here. I think maybe not quite the number one any longer, but cost reduction used to be a big player in saying, hey, we'll move to the cloud, we'll save lots of money, it'll be great. And that is certainly viable. That is certainly possible, but there's also kind of a trade-off as well of saying, well, it may not be net dollar savings, but I'm going to gain in reliability and the agility that we have now that we're working with the cloud-based services and we're not worrying about hosting equipment and all those elements here. And of course, that's the primary factor of coming to the cloud. You're no longer thinking about the physical data centers, the equipment, the procurement process, and all those basic elements here, which are not necessarily everybody's primary strength. You're likely working, you're with a company or department that's got other things to be concerned with, and it's not necessarily just technology and equipment that you want to work with. So identifying what's really the use case to do this, and do we see the net benefits? And there are ways to plan on what do we anticipate going to the cloud, what benefits do we foresee going to the cloud. So we'll scoot along here. Now, what can get in the way? Well, certainly if you've got existing investments, you've got long-standing software license agreements, or you've provisioned resources, or you're committed to certain standing arrangements, that might be a bit of an impediment here. Certainly during the migration, application interdependencies are going to be an issue. We've got to be able to deal with migrating either a collection of applications that can move as a group, or find ways to move components but remain in communication during that transition process. Obviously, downtime is going to be a factor. We want to do this with as little disruption as possible. Upfront expenses, plan on extra cost during the migration. I mean, in essence, you're going to have a period of time where you're doubling up on things you're executing. You're running things in the cloud to prep and identify and test out the viability while still running things on premises. And you're likely going to be demanding more network bandwidth from your data centers, as you are not only serving your standard applications and services, but you're also trying to upload data and duplicate things into the cloud to prep for that cloud-based service that you plan to implement here. The last two come down to people. You could have skeptical stakeholders. They're just not sure, where things are fine. Why would we want to change? What's going to be the benefit for me? And there's going to be a bit of, buy-in to get the team members on board here. And ideally, we've got a top-down agreement that cloud is the direction we want to go. We see the net benefits. Here are here's what's going to be good for you. Here's why it's going to benefit the teams. And lastly, of course, is lack of expertise. If it's all brand new, then there are things that are very different coming into the cloud. I don't want to overstate that. I mean, frankly, you're going to operate servers and monitor your applications and keep up on the performance and the scalability, and you're going to address problems and issues just like you do with your on-premises hosted applications. That part's, big picture, not all that different. It's just there are going to be some different tools perhaps we want to leverage, a little bit of a different way to see how things are going to work. So it's important to get people up to speed on, here's the new way that you're going to see your application. Here's how you're going to be accessing your tools and your services going forward. And of course, try to smooth that transition for all of the different members who are going to be affected by this. So what's going to make this successful? Again, if we're thinking very large scale, we're talking quite disruptive potential implementation across an enterprise. So as I said, one of the key things is getting an actual executive level C-suite sponsorship, that there's a true buy-in that says, this is what we're looking to do, not necessarily do it or you're fired, but this is what we're going to do, and we want everybody on board to help us make this happen. In many cases, the approach will be a cloud-first strategy. And the idea is simply, going forward, anything new, along with whatever we migrate to the cloud over the next couple of years, perhaps. This could be a long, detailed process. But as we get our current services into the cloud, anything new we're looking to develop, we also want to focus on a cloud-based implementation. So we're going to get developers and new projects up to speed in a cloud-hosted environment. That is where we're going to start the new things. We're not looking back. Now we'll talk about assessing what we have on-prem and deciding what and if everything can move to the cloud. We might have to achieve that, or maybe that's a bit of a luxury, perhaps. We've got on-prem, we're not necessarily leaving, but we're looking for benefits of the cloud. Now, there will certainly be changes to the organization, right? New operating approaches, new processes, just the new tools, and able to identify, we've been tracking these, these particular characteristics and knowing what's going on in an environment. And now I got this new place I got to keep an eye on. And how am I going to get those numbers and those reports, and what's it going to tell me? And how does that factor or correlate with what I've been looking at before? Definitely much of what we'll talk today in our brief discussion is that we've got a roadmap that we've really laid out. Here's the step-by-step. We're going to start slowly. We're going to start thoroughly. We're going to really look at each phase of this process, so we have as few stumbles as possible. And where we do have mistakes or we find shortcomings in our plan, we're going to reconvene and identify the shortcomings and shore that up to make the effectively iterative process of migration at the end, make it much smoother and more viable here. Now, something AWS has found for customers is that if they will establish for themselves what's come to be called the Cloud Center of Excellence, highfalutin name, but essentially that you've got a team of the experts, or at least the go-to folks for the answers for those ongoing questions during the migration. You've got a set of folks who are going to be essentially the arbiters of how are we doing this? What's the approach we're looking to do here? If I've got a choice of service A, service B, have we made a decision yet? Essentially to keep the plan on track, right? To keep everybody consistent. That doesn't mean that new or changed features might happen in the future, but the goal is that we got some folks who've spent maybe more time than everybody else on getting down into the nitty-gritty of cloud services, cloud features, and what's going to prove to be beneficial for our migration. That's what's going to be important. Of course, maintaining any particular standards, compliance requirements, SLAs that we have with customers or other partners, so we know how we have to implement this and what are the sensitive areas, what are the areas that are going to need the extra focus when things happen. We definitely want to encourage experimentation. Identify, what's the right mix of services, deployment choices, maybe get a consistent, I don't want to say cookie cutter, but sort of find a process that's going to work for the deployments for the majority of our applications. Get those migrating, get those up to speed in the cloud, get the teams focused on the new tools they need to maintain and manage those services. And then ultimately, we're going to, the goal is to encourage them. Hey, you've got a new environment, you've got some new tools, take your application. And the benefit we're looking for is that you can advance and experiment and enhance what's going on with our solutions. Now, if we break down the process, and definitely when we're discussing the larger scale deployment, we don't want to short circuit any of these particular steps here. We want to make sure that we're giving them their due attention. And that really is in the first few steps. And the first few steps are really to focus on, you can see preparation, business planning. All right, any serious change to an environment, any serious new program, new implementation requires that we've got all the players involved. People understand what's coming. We can, as best as possible, see what each step going forward is going to look like. So we know, here's what's happening next, and here's what we anticipate, and here's what we'll do if things are not correct or have an issue. So it's really doing the planning, doing the due diligence. Now, as I mentioned, if you've got just a few services you're looking to migrate, or maybe you're at a department level and it's not maybe a big corporate transition yet, maybe you're the early adopter, say, could you go out there and see what this cloud thing looks like? That could be a simpler approach, but again, don't short circuit the planning phase, right? And it boils down to identifying, what have I got running? What are my options in the cloud? What's going to be needed to host this when I get to AWS? Are there choices in AWS that might improve what I'm doing, might offer me benefits right out of the box? Or am I looking to get to the cloud, get off of my local equipment, establish my processes, and then start looking to optimize, right? You can approach this in really all these formats, a choice of, do I get an improvement right out of the box? Or am I just looking to get to the cloud and then start developing and enhancing what I've got? We're going to drill down on each of these steps here just a little bit. But the second primary phase is then identify, what exactly do I have? I've got a certain kind of application. Does it have certain dependencies? I've got a web app database, 3-tiered architecture application. What are the requirements of those components? Down to the literal issues, what kind of CPUs and disk space are needed for these? What kind of performance do they demand from their compute? Because I got to be able to host something similar in the cloud. Also, what kind of data set do I have? This is a large database, a small database. What kind of time will it take to migrate that data? What am I looking to do on the cloud side? There are database solutions. Do I want to run my own server? Do I want to utilize some other features of AWS? So really getting to know, what do you have? What are the interdependencies? What are the requirements for that service? Who interacts with it? What kind of privileges will I need to reestablish? What kind of protections do I need to maintain to make this migration much more viable? And then, not to call it the simplest, but ultimately, then it's a matter of looking at planning for each of these applications and implementing what AWS calls their migration factory, which, if you think of it, is kind of running through the applications, implementing our migration strategy, which is going to involve the right people and the right tools and teams to implement this. But essentially iterate through your small or large list of applications to be moved, and move them, validate, hand them off to the team owners once you've got it migrated, and they take over, and you go back, or the team goes back and works on the next migration. So that becomes a bit of an iterative process. So for the basic stages, again, we want to spend a good amount of time developing the project, identifying what's needed here. We have kind of one way of looking at the migration process, and you can see that's identifying key elements and looking for cloud native solutions versus simply replanting a server, an app on a server in the cloud itself. We might be able to retire, obviously, some tech debt here. We can isolate and decommission the hardware we've got here. So the common journey for lots of customers to drive this innovation goes through these key steps. And of course, over a period of time to make that happen. Now, over the past couple of years, several years now, AWS has continued to develop the assistance that they can offer for customers during this migration process. All right. Early days, of course, you can get support and discussions with AWS, professional services. They would have teams that have worked with other customers, performed migrations. But actually, more and more formalized tools have been developed over the last few years. So anytime's a great time to be migrating to AWS. But actually, it's certainly as good a time as it's ever been for lots of supporting elements to make things happen. So there's a couple of approaches here. This references to a service called a Migration Readiness Assessment Overview, an MRA, all right? And you can see it's looking at a number of factors for your team and your environment, and kind of how ready are you for this transition? Do you have all the things you need? Are there gaps in training or planning or processes before you want to undertake this approach here? Now, very early on, again, AWS started out, as I said, they had some guidelines and they could give you assistance. And part of the initial guidelines were a document that's been developed and continues to be developed called the Cloud Adoption Framework. And this is sort of it is the framework, imagine that, for guiding a company to come to the cloud and look at all aspects of how it affects your environment, the people, the technologies, the processes, all the aspects, the security, the compliance. Look at all the aspects of what this transition is going to do, how it's going to affect you, and really to see, are you ready in each of these areas to approach this? So the MRA built on this, and you can see it's effectively about a 60-question survey, lines up with the adoption framework's goals and focal points. And it's actually done as a one-day workshop. So this is a get-together with AWS folks, through an interview process with your key stakeholders. And they kind of walk you through this survey. Hey, where are you on this topic, in this area? How do you feel you are in readiness here, there, or whatnot? And, it's not to poke holes in your environment, it's to find any shortcomings. Identify any gaps that can be addressed during the planning process, and enter the next three-letter acronym, the Migration Readiness and Planning Approach. So this is relatively formal, right? Get together with AWS folks, support team, have a bit of a one-day workshop with your stakeholders, and really try to, dig down into, what is it we're going to need? Oh, we need to shore up a few elements here, or we could focus on this a bit more. Help you with prepping to make this transition, right? Now, the actual results that come out, I think I've got a bigger picture. There's a bigger picture. You've effectively got these different sections, and you can see here different areas that are going to be necessary for the approach. I should really highlight the table on the left. These are really the categories of the cloud adoption framework, all right? So the business, the people, the governance, the platform, security, and the actual operations. Those are the focal points. You can see business related and technical. So there's two sides to this. There's all the folks who are going to be impacted by it. And then there's the literal, what I tend to deal with on day-to-day trading is here's how you make it work in AWS, the technical type. So if I can pop back real quickly. So they show from a project some observations and actions. Identify if you've got some key elements. So they drill down to some examples like, does your particular system tracking database, is it up to date? Does it have all the targeted things you're looking to migrate? Have you set up a cloud center of excellence team lead and some business folks to join in that group? Due to your particular business environment, do you have certain regulations, requirements you need to identify? Do you have an assessment team for any regulatory elements here? So it's really to help you focus on what's specific about our needs. What are we going to need when we do this? Are we prepped for that? And again, if we zoom in, you've got a quick, color-coded areas to address. Obviously, the green areas are really strong in this environment. And we see here, I've got I've got a key leader in the Center of Excellence that's established. I've got stakeholder sign-off and funding in place. All right, so the greens are very key there. And then we've got a few other elements. What's the high-level business use case? Maybe we haven't fleshed that out or got everybody, on board or identifying, here's what's going to be good for you. Where's our shortcoming? Yeah, a detailed business case. We haven't gotten there yet. Okay. Haven't done that. That's an area we can focus more thoroughly on. Shortcoming here, project management capability. We haven't really put the team together yet. We still have some folks, we're interviewing or we're looking for key players who want to transition and focus on this project. So you can see where a lot of this is experience and people ready to go. And of course, that's going to be maybe the most common aspect as well. This is all brand new and I don't have cloud people yet. We got to get folks up to speed. So from the MRA itself, you can actually get to a readout of the MRA results. You got, once again, the adoption framework categories that you can go to here. So this is a dashboard you could connect and look at your results, different aspects of those results. And again, when you go through this process during that interview / seminar day, that you're giving honest ratings. Where do you think we are in each of the characteristics as we walk through this? The goal is to, as formally as possible, identify anything that's going to impede this transition. We want it to succeed. Let's make sure we've got it. This is showing how you can visualize the results of this assessment in a few different ways. Heat map charts, what that's called a radar chart. You've got different formats here. This has a bit of a kind of a timeline reference to what needs to be addressed, different sequence. Right, so this is to help with the project management. All right. So the outcomes of this, for you, the customer yourself, get consensus on, where we are. What are we going to need? Do we have any key pockets of capability? What are the gaps here? AWS, evaluate what's their capabilities. Does AWS has exactly what we're looking for? Is it a good match, right? Fair to say that not everything is going to be better off in the cloud, depending on its status and what we need to do with it. But of course, the action plan is the key here. What can we do to approach this? Now, for many environments, you might be a smaller team or part of a smaller group that's got a large job to perform here. And most certainly, you might bring on partners. There are AWS partner network folks who are there to assist customers to get migrated to the cloud, even run your cloud environment once it's up and going. I mean, there are third-party services to help you in all these areas. If you're working with a partner, then obviously they need to kind of see, well, where are you in this project approach? Identify your needs, understand are there any situations we might need to address, and help them to help you guide your teams through this process. Obviously, fewer roadblocks and a common view of what's needed. Right? So we know what's coming and how to approach it. Now, this MRA is something to do very, very early on. And we might even revisit it as we're progressing a bit. But the idea, as we break down, in the approach to migration overall, we break it down into this assessments, readiness planning, and then the actual migration process. All right, that's later in this whole approach. So the MRA comes very early, so we can identify any needs, any elements we need. And that's going to point us to the areas during the readiness and planning where we can see, well, where do we need to shore up some issues? What should we jump on first? Let's set up a timeline of processes. And you can see the broad array of elements here, which we'll touch on briefly. But Discovery and planning is really the first bit, looking at literally what are the applications themselves, right? I've got this business plan. What is it we're actually going to be migrating here? I need to identify the AWS environment to which I will be moving things. We'll address the landing zone idea. Again, your skills level. Who have you got? How many folks do you have? Do we need to get some people up to speed? Do we need to bring in partners? What kind of assistance might be needed for that? Fleshing out that business case once again. Identifying compliance needs, the operations team's requirements, any new tools, new approaches, what's going to be needed there. And depending on the size and scope of the migration and your team members, we've got a couple of different migration approaches that we'll talk about. But in essence, ideally, we're going to be able to commit at least a small team of folks to just handle migrations, stepping away from what they were doing or bringing them on board for this purpose. And they're going to deal with each of the different applications across the different departments, the different teams. They're going to be the migration experts, talk to these stakeholders, say, your turn, we're going to migrate. Let's get a breakdown of all your needs and dependencies, and let's put it through our migration process. So to simplify that in general, discover what we've got, an individual need, design and plan our deployment approach, build and implement that transitional cloud-based deployment, integrate with any other components, make sure we've got the support here, validate the functionality. Part of a migration is that we have a sense of, usually from the team holders, what does a successful transition look like to you? Your app's up and running and working properly, of course. Are you looking for some X number of improvements or changes right out of the box? Or just having viable environment tools you need, and then you're going to move forward? There needs to be a validation mechanism. Cut over to the team. Cut over to the cloud-based solution, so offline the on-prem implementation, go to the cloud, monitor, identify, look for any issues, and then get sign off from the team and go to the next application. So with the MRA, they reference to throwing another 3-letter acronym in here, and I've got to actually look. I don't even know if I remember what it stands for. The MAP. Now that I'm looking at it here. Oh, there we go. The Migration Acceleration Program. Forgive me for that. MAP is another service within AWS that can get you some assistance. Again, it is Migration Acceleration Program. So the steps here, if you're interested in taking part in this kind of tool set, again, working with AWS to develop that, schedule and meet and set up all the required elements here, facilitate using the MRI as a guide here. So this is like a next step after we've assessed our strengths and weaknesses with the MRA. We then are moving to kind of an accelerated, we'll get you going in this area. You need to work on this area. We have partners or assistants. We can get you in these areas. And the goal is to build on the observations we got from the MRA itself. So phase 2, in essence, is now, really essentially looking at the individual applications. We're getting down to, we're really going to migrate now. I got my teams in place. I got a center of excellence reference team who can guide or answer the questions that will be coming up during this process. We've got buy-in from the top, and we are ready to look at the individual applications and start approaching the actual migration where we're moving our way towards it. So the discovery phase, dissecting what you've got implemented here. Look for different application patterns. Can I group things in certain ways? Are there certain interdependencies I have to respect? What's the design process? Not to mention, what teams are involved, who are the lead contacts for each of these applications. Let's get some emails and get some references and start some discussions with each of them about their hopes and dreams for coming to the cloud. And then we'll start working out a backlog or a list, if you will, a to-do list of the applications based on a readiness assessment that we're looking at. So it's going to be gathering the data we have for what's in place or what are my applications. Again, here's the owners, the critical nature of the app. We kind of want to put a rating on that and assess, not only, two things, critical nature to the business and kind of an assessment of difficulty of migration. I've got a relatively freestanding application. It could be very important, but it doesn't have a lot of interdependencies. That might be an easier, first choice for an early migration. I've got some very entangled multi-applications database relationship. I'm going to have to untangle and work with that much more carefully. Right. So get to the owners, the critical nature of the actual applications, key characteristics, again, port number requirements, performance, CPU memory requirements, the infrastructure needed to do that. Get down to the servers, and actually the physical servers is where you'd look at performance metrics and things. Now, one thing that's nice, this is a good chance to properly maybe size the servers to the applications where you may not have been as well sized on premises. You might have a couple of standardized, server platforms or VM platforms. And when you got a new app, you deploy the platform and you run the new app. And it might have more CPU than it needs, or, but it's kind of cookie cutter. Again, operations like things to be very standardized. So I identify what's going to be needed for each of these deployments. Maybe I could better tune or size the hosting environment, which of course in the cloud is going to affect what you pay for as well. Larger servers cost more money. So if you've got the right sized implementation for the hardware, the performance needs, then you've got a better suited server for the process. The network angle, we're going to need what kind of visibility this application's public facing or definitely not public facing. I need certain ports to be accessible from one service to another. I need user access in certain different ways, SSH or RDP or other management platform interconnections. So what are going to be the needs there? We're going to migrate those as well to control the access to our servers. And last but not least, what are my data storage needs, right? I've got servers, they're going to have disk space, but I also might have, archive data or backups in large data stores. And I want to bring those to the cloud. I want to get off-prem. Again, the business driver might be we're getting out of our data center. There are a number of customers who've done that. Others are saying we're going to downsize, or rather than get that next data center because we're facing size issues, we're going to stay in the one and we're going to do a cloud first going forward. Anyway, I've got data, I've got compute, I've got software that I need to get migrated, and what are going to be the necessary requirements for that. So during the analysis, right, this again is the discovery phase, the portfolio phase. How many apps have I got? How many servers? I got a cluster of 2 here and 4 there. And are there, key dependencies, as I mentioned? If we can map this out, or certainly if you've got the records already in place, the teams have nice, discrete records of how these things are all assembled, all the better. If not, we have to go looking and identifying these pieces. allocate and get the right size target resources. Like I said, we might better tune the target environment for the needs of our applications. Come up with a naming strategy. You might very well have a naming scheme for servers, production versus development versus staging, departmental naming elements. When you bring things to the cloud, we highly recommend that you are labeling your resources in a similar fashion. What's called tagging within AWS is putting labels onto your resources. And you can have all sorts of different label, names and values, anything that's meaningful to you. But by all means, bring your naming conventions straight over and remain consistent. Now, this wild diagram is to highlight I've got to look closely here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We used to call this, I want to say, the 6 R's, the letter R, the 6 R's of migration. I think they added a 7th one at some point. Yeah, there is a 7th one tucked in here now. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, maybe it's 7, right? But, just to be mnemonic, I suppose, an R term for each of the approaches to the migration. So simply put, we've gone through the discovery. We have, set up our backlog, our list of what are we going to do first, second, third. We've looked at the critical nature, the complexity assessment. And the ideal is let's pick some simple one-off things, move a development environment or get that stood up and running and get the dev teams in there. Things that are obviously not mission critical first, so we can learn from any mistakes. But ultimately, at this point is we've got these different migration paths. And again, nothing earth-shattering here. You'll definitely understand what's meant, but the R's, if you will, the new one that got added to the mix is this relocate. Now, relocate, I think, AWS has seen more and more customers might be running containers, Dockerized applications, or if you're a VMware partner and you've got virtual machines on-prem, then bringing your containerized apps or your VMware instances, we can bring those directly into the cloud, right? We can host Docker containers in the cloud. There are services to help you do that with AWS. There is also a partnership with VMware where you can utilize your VMware relationship to continue running VMware hosting environments inside AWS. And therefore, vMotion your servers from on-prem to the cloud and back again if you want. Utilize your VMware expertise to make that happen. So that's the newest little add-on to this migration path here. All right. And of course, for each of these migration choices, it's going to boil down to what are the right tools, what are the right steps, who's going to be involved here, what are the necessary target configuration requirements before I make the transition, things like that. So from there, we look at what was the original first step, or the simplest, and we call it rehosting. And the idea of rehosting, I think, is maybe clear. It's I've got a Windows application running on Windows Server on-prem. I'm going to bring up a Windows Server platform in the cloud and run my application. I'll migrate the data. I'll bring the application and any of its components, and I'll go from hosting it here to hosting it over there. This could potentially, it's typically the simplest transition. I'm not doing a whole lot to change things. I'm just not going to run the hardware anymore. So in essence, what's the approach to do that? Maybe I'm just going to manually, reinstall and configure my app over in the cloud. Not necessarily, a whole migration, quote unquote. I got to get the data set over there as needed for the app. Or you might be able to leverage some automation tools. Definitely rehosting is something that a number of tools can assist us in doing. They can scan what you got, they can set up what's needed to host it, and they can make the transition. So there's a lot of tools to help doing that. Now, a variation on that is called replatforming. And again, they got the quickies here, lift and shift. This one's called lift and reshape. I guess put it on a workout plan. But really, replatforming is to say, okay, I've got an application, and let's say it's running on Windows Server 2013. I think there was one. And of course, 2013 is a little out of date, if that's viable. 2016, 2012, that's what it was. I got a 2012 hosted application. Like, well, that's kind of no longer supported by Microsoft. It's not really a viable forward step if we're coming to the cloud. Now's my opportunity and really my requirement to say, well, let's see how I can get my app onto 2022 or whatever the latest Windows Server platform is. I'm not as much a Windows guy. I'm more a Linux guy. But let's determine, let's get on the newer platform. And this is what replatforming is about. I'm going to get on the newer version of the operating system. Or maybe I'm running an older version of my software, and now's a good time to upgrade the version of the software that I'm running, something off the shelf, some third-party application. Not to mention, and this is part of the next transitional approach, but maybe I'm going to go to that vendor and say, I'm going to host a new version of your app in the cloud. Do you have any more cloud-focused licensing models or purchasing models? And maybe looking to see if I can enhance that as well. And I would wrap that into the next section, which we call repurchasing. Right now, repurchasing might literally be, the old third-party solution I was using. Maybe it's kind of end of life, or, I might be perfectly happy with it. But the vendor doesn't have really any kind of cloud-focused approach, or there are newer cloud-based solutions, including software as a service offerings by vendors. Maybe I'm going to transition to a whole new solution for my HR application or my expensing app or my customer management application. Maybe I'm going to just move to something entirely new. Right. So, of course, from a migration standpoint, that's really getting a new agreement going with a new provider and then migrating the data, probably doing some transitional adjustment to get your data set into the new solution. So we're really talking more of an install and a setup than we are a migration. But the data still has to be migrated, of course. Now, the last migration model, we call it refactoring. And what, we like to highlight that the idea, of course, of coming into the cloud, coming to AWS, it has some different benefits to the way that your applications are modeled and deployed. You come to the cloud, AWS is very much about running small, discrete, executable applications on an as-needed basis. So what we see in the architectural approach coming to the cloud are customers looking at their large applications and saying, we should really break those down into a more microservice approach or a smaller, more modular approach where I can actually host or execute the different module elements leveraging different solutions in AWS. There, again, I can containerize some of these. Some could run on servers. Some could actually leverage some of our serverless features where I've got execute environments and I don't have to worry about servers. I don't think about the platform to run my executables. So in a lot of cases, certainly for your own in-house applications, if they're in active development, possibly already in a more modular designed approach, such as it is, the idea of refactoring or approaching your applications in a more, call it, cloud-centric manner. Whether it's a big transition from how you've had your application in the past, or maybe you're actually just conforming to a platform, a different platforming environment to host that modular architecture. But for the biggest bang for the buck, as far as running an on-prem app and having a cloud-hosted solution, is to be able to leverage all of the beneficial aspects of the cloud. And that, again, is taking advantage of different execute environments, different implementation choices, and leveraging the best ones for each solution here. That's the key. Now, for many customers, again, the rehosting or maybe replatforming, and we'll throw relocate in, just getting what I've got on-prem, getting it over to the cloud. We're trying to decommission our data center or, offload and not do as much investment locally. We want to get it in the cloud. So let's get it over there. And then maybe we'll think about leveraging other cloud benefits here. Go to production. And actually, what used to be at the end of this line was optimize going forward, right? I'm in the cloud now. I've got some new capabilities, new ways to do things. As each team learns about those possible benefits, expanding on how they've implemented things from the past, from an on-prem mindset to now this cloud-based mindset. To come up with that backlog, again, we want to decide, well, what should I move first? What should I move last? What has the most entanglements? And that would be the bottom left here, application complexity here. How many dependencies and, of course, other interactive components am I going to have to deal with as I untangle, at least physically, to get something in the cloud while some dependent components remain on-prem for a period of time? Of course, there's the critical nature to the business. What's going to be the impact? What's the size of the data sets? How much activity does this application see? And not to mention different environmental priorities. As I said, probably getting dev and test environments up and going in the cloud early on is going to be an easy win or an easier win. You're not threatening any production applications at that point, and you get your migration team gets to practice. Right? Practice not bad. Now, the literal nature of discovering what is in our portfolio, what do we have in our data center? Again, you might have a well documented record of every application and every interrelationship they have. Every team is very thorough, but ultimately there's going to be those factors where there's something over here running in rack 13 on the second shelf. I don't know what this is. Who owns this? What's it doing? Right? So an issue is finding a way to discover what you've got running out in your environment and getting down to the details. So they mentioned a discovery tool here. Get to the reality, 2 key approaches: installing an agent on all of your servers, or can I get by with some kind of external agentless probing solution? That's what this boils down to. With an agent-based solution, now this means you're installing a little piece of software on your production environment, and that could certainly be in conflict with some security requirements. So that's the nature of the choices we're making here. But if I've got an agent installed on a server, then it can scan and monitor and capture data ongoing for that server's processing and execute environment. It can capture exactly what goes on, over a 2-week period. We want to get a good data collection, get a sense of, again, CPU and memory requirements, disk space demands, what kind of IO, what kind of network traffic does this implement, what ports are active on this server. So the more intimate the scanning capability, the more thorough, the better. We need to place that data, somewhere centralized and accessible. And then identifying any dependencies, right? Are my servers or applications interdependent with other servers? Again, that will jive with maybe the port number interactions. Like I said, performance, other elements there. And are there any known constraints with this on-premises solution? Try to identify that. Not bad if you've got a method of doing a cost analysis of your on-prem solutions here. In many cases, environments have done a breakdown of, per server cost per month, what overall costing. So they get a sense of what their spend is. And that's a very nice thing you can use to compare with tools that can look at spend in the cloud, which is very much on a usage level. Now, quick note here, what's called the landing zone. Think of the landing zone as what's the architectural structure in AWS where I'm going to run my applications, right? And they're showing you some examples here. The approach that's become the standard and the recommended approach by AWS for customers is that you create a multi-account environment. And an account is, one membership, if you will, with AWS. Create an account, you get a 12-digit number, that's an account. But for isolation purposes, for organizational purposes, customers are more and more leveraging independent multiple accounts to separate workloads from a security or compliance standpoint. Keep dev separate from prod, keep local separate from foreign involvement, whatever you might want to deal with, right? So this diagram is showing the little dotty boxes would be the different accounts here. And multiple accounts, AWS has a utility or a service to manage that called organizations. So we actually have a managing organizations account, and it's going to manage the member accounts of the organization. So you deploy your organizations and again, your accounts, pardon me, and you can have accounts you can see for the sandbox for people to practice. You've got a dev, pre-prod and prod, shared services, other elements. Also in this multi-account approach is to take the logging, the record keeping, the performance monitoring from all your various independent accounts and centrally track those in what they're calling core account here, but essentially in a logging and performance monitoring account. So everything's in a central place. It's separate from where it's being generated. It can be monitored by separate teams who have that responsibility. But big picture is I've got to think about the architecture in the cloud before I bring up some servers. Right? I got to have something in place. Where am I going to host this? So the landing zone discussion is going to be part of that initial phase. We got to get this out there set up and going and somebody able to understand it before my first application can go to the cloud. Mentioned already the center of excellence. This is in your environment, your team members, possibly with partner assistance, to get your key players, kind of the standard bearers. Who do we go to when we have questions, when we need to resolve issues or conflicts over choices? Kind of to have a standard bearer, if you will. And of course, somebody who's maybe got an answer to a question, I don't know how to do this. How do we want to approach this? Have a team that we can go to. Now they look at a few different elements here. A decentralized approach for the cloud where you've got, effectively each business unit kind of runs its own cloud department, if you will. They do their own thing. They've got their own strategies. For shared services, you might have a more centralized approach, different strategies, but managed by a central team. Or, again, center of excellence, we've got a standardized strategy that's able to adjust and modify for different delivery requirements, right? And of course, the most standardized, most structured would be that everything has a central approach and a central reference. So again, this starts with the business case. Why does it make sense for us to go to AWS? We've got to look at the cost of this migration itself. As I said, you're going to spend more money over the migration to get to that place. Cost of ownership modeling, we have tools to do that. Business value assessment, and what kind of optimizations are we anticipating? And we can attempt to, again, monetize or put numbers against that to decide how best to make this happen. So start from a focused business case here. You can see we went through the MRA, and that might have helped us refine the business case a bit more. Accelerator content, which came from that MAP, Migration Acceleration Program, to try to get us more finely tuned. And then when we're getting into the real readiness and planning phase, we've got the detailed approach here. Kind of down to each department or each team. Here's what you're looking for in this migration and what we hope to achieve from it. Obviously, you planned out all these elements. Summarize all of this, you're spending time planning, assessing, doling out expectations, and identifying steps to take here. Ultimately, then, you've reached the point where, hey, it's time for that first app on the backlog. We start the migration day one here, set up a process, look at the details of this app, look at requirements, look at our landing zones and the environment we've got. And we'll look at migrating an application and maybe several iterations of an application. But the goal is to, start simply, get a little bit of success under your belt, and or have some issues and address them and learn from them. Before we get to the mission critical and the highly interdependent and complex components here. If we can identify and really, document / orchestrate the operations, again, monitor how it goes, the logging, the provisioning, identify all the steps you're taking so that you can plan for, any backups, disaster recovery, et cetera. Your goal is to set up this iterative process, again, that can just keep on rolling, right, as the successes become more and more higher percentage, if you will. Now, another approach to this is just looking at who's responsible, who's kept in the loop, who's just informed on the different steps of the process. So a RACI chart is giving us that kind of a breakdown. Responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. They threw a support in here as well. But you've got, different team or role jobs identified here. The activities, which are essentially kind of running what I call this, not necessarily time frame in this case. But we're just identifying, who's going to need to be involved, who's the go-to, who's the lead, who's responsible for each of these steps, who's kept informed, who do I go to if there's a problem, who do I consult? So kind of break down how will we approach the needs of each of these. Kind of getting near the end here, so I'm just going to cover these last bits. We've touched on them. We're just going to slide on each one of these. But of course, understanding the security requirements, for your, corporate security, legal requirements, whatever's necessary, governmental requirements, identify what you need. And of course, have ideally a team that's going to be responsible for keeping track of the steps and the compliance needs. Now, one of the first things we talk about in the AWS training very early on is that coming to the cloud has a shared responsibility. You are getting rid of your hardware and your data centers to some degree. And you're coming to AWS and saying, hey, could you do that, all that hardware stuff for me? Could you do the infrastructure? I don't want to do that anymore. It's tedious and repetitive, and it's just churn. It doesn't give me net benefits here. It's just where things have to go. So that's AWS, the responsibility of the cloud, as they like to say, which is at its simplest, will protect the data centers, will protect the equipment, will protect the services, will maintain them and keep the uptimes with a variety of SLAs of performance, and will provide you with compute, storage, database networking across the globe, right? All around the world here. Now, when you bring your solutions to our hosted environment, you, the customer, are still responsible for that application you're deploying. Does it work properly? Who's in charge of running it? Who's got permissions to configure it? Where is your data going to be stored? Are you going to encrypt your data? What's going to be the communications method? Are you going to encrypt traffic between your servers and your other elements? You are responsible for protecting your applications and the OS it's running. All right. The platform's there for you, but you've got to keep the services running and the security of the data. Now, to get right down to some tools, AWS has expanded in recent years, expanded a little bit into some more tools here. And I was just having a look, and there's actually some newer things that I've not even seen before. So there's a lot of good stuff. All right. But simply put, there's a section in your AWS Management Console all about migration. And there's a centralized tool called the Migration Hub, which is referenced right there. Look for the shield. Migration Hub. Now, the idea since early on is that this is a one-stop place to see all the phases of your migration. So in the hub, there are discovery records, and there is a discovery tool that AWS offers, an agent-based tool that you can install and gather data from your systems, right? And it comes to a database in your cloud account. And then there are migration tools. And in fact, this is where some enhancements have come along. Newest, not newest, but the newest migration tool to the mix is literally called the Server Migration Service. There you are right there, Server Migration Service. Now, if you know anything about AWS, you would know that that would likely be called SMS, Server Migration Service. But the fact is we have something else called SMS. So for better or worse, the Server Migration Service is called MGN, as in migration. All right. So MGN is the Server Migration Service. But just a note, a very robust tool for literally moving servers and applications from an on-prem to a cloud. There is a focused database migration service as well. All right, that's been with us for a little while longer. Service Migration Service is the newest of the migrating tools to get here. Here. All right. Now, certainly you can see a number of other elements here. Let me point back over to the decision support. Application Discovery Service, that's the agent-driven tool. You install the agent on your servers, and it just kind of sits there and listens, and it records information to a database in the cloud, in your cloud account. And then you've got some migration tools. There's an older application migration service that was focused on VMs migrating, not not bare metal servers and the like. And then just to highlight, it gets rolled into the migration list are a number of data transmission tools, data storage and transfer. So we need to get data from our on-prem environment to the cloud. Do I have a little bit of data? Do I have a lot of data? Do I have ongoing upload needs or one huge transition to get repositioned? There are different tools to make different forms of data migration itself. Effectively, is it over network connectivity and using bandwidth, or the one solution here called Snowball, which is literally write my data to a device and ship it back to AWS. So from all of this, again, what really seems to guide at least initial, getting over the first early hurdles is that strong justification. We have, intention to go to the cloud. We have these reasons why we have seen and devised how it's going to benefit us. An effective business case and the process to create it helps remove friction, right? Convince the skeptics, ideally, help them with the transition as well. If we have a strong business case, we're going to migrate faster, right? We're going to stay true to the goal, if you will. Some of the key thoughts, some infrastructure savings. As we get things migrated, we can be powering things down, right? We can save a little time. Ultimately, looking at the post-migration cost assessments, right? And what do we see as the other kinds of business benefits here? It's not necessarily just net dollars, more agility, more innovative environments, better place for developers to expand on their projects, and lots of other elements here. A lot of ways to approach your transition. And again, there is kind of the speedy approach. Let's get to the cloud and think about changes later, or maybe incorporating some changes in the transitional phase. Kind of depends on where you and your applications and your teams are in the process. And part of what's the business driver, like I said. If we've got a 5-year plan, I've got 250 applications. We've got several dozen that are homegrown. We're going to spend the time and start early refactoring some of those. I didn't mention the other 2 R's, by the way, now that we're back to the picture. There might be some solutions you are going to keep on-prem. Like I said, there are some things that will not move to the cloud or won't be viable in a cloud, which is x86-based platforms of compute. And a nice side benefit, you might find some things you don't need anymore. You could retire some services that they're running and forgotten, or you've got lots of small services you can combine into something larger. So you might find some retired services as well. That's just net gain right out of the box. This is the chart for each of those approaches here. And they don't have the relocate on the chart here. I don't know why. But again, that relocate is the new member. If you're containerized or VMware, you're literally just bringing that image to a new hosted place. And you can transition that in a matter of minutes. All right. They're using this chart to kind of identify where do we see our migration choices? I got, we're going to rehost about 40%, 30% replatform. That kind of makes sense, right? We're running on some servers. I'll get some servers in the cloud and we'll host it over there. All right. Now, of course, our role here is to offer you the training the backup, the planning and execution for all your needs within AWS. I'm going to invite, let's see if I can find her here. Yeah. Sophia, are you still with me? I think she is.
Hey, Craig. Yes, I am still with you. And that seems like a good note just to share our summer day or summer ready savings.
Great.
For
So
everyone.
let me stop this.
Sounds good. And just 1 second, I'll bring that up there.
So let me just say here while Sophia is bringing up some of our information, thanks everybody for joining me. This presentation has been recorded, and the link for that recording, Sophia will put into the chat here again. I didn't see any chat questions, so if you have any questions right now, you might want to drop in there. We can make that happen. I can try to answer those.
Thank you, Craig, and I'll share my screen now.
Excellent.
All right, I do have to apologize. My full screen window is trying to take over both my monitors, so I'm going to leave it off full screen. But is everyone able, or at least Craig, are you able to share or to see my screen?
That works.
Very good. All right, so we do have a summer promo for classes. If you want to learn more about this, I'm going to put a link into the chat window for everyone. It covers pretty much all of our live virtual classes, mostly the public ones. But if you want to find out about private ones, for instance, if your company is interested in private training, you just want to follow that link and click on Get a Quote, and you can chat with one of our representatives about private training. But for public classes, you can get up to $500 off. 100, as you see on the screen, off a 1-day course, 200 on a 2-day course, etc. You can actually save quite a bit there, but you do want to make sure, if you look at that link, that you register for that class before the deadline. And that deadline is on the website. And as Craig mentioned about the recording for today, you'll be able to see that tomorrow at the following URL that I'm also pasting into the chat window for everyone. So that's in our resources section of the website, and you should see that under videos. So I'll give you just an example. If you go to resources and scroll down, you'll see our videos section here, and you should see that tomorrow with the same title as the Discovery Day today. So if anyone has any questions about that summer promo or about how to access the recording, feel free to reach out to me in the chat window. You can also email us anytime. I'll put our team's email address into the chat window as well. So that's livevirtual@exitcertified.com. That's my team that I'm from. Whether it's for a live virtual class or not, we'll help you get routed to the same, the right person that you're trying to look for. Either way, if we don't know the answer to something, we're always happy to help and find that answer for you. But otherwise, definitely recommend that you look into that deal that we have for training now. That's pretty good savings. We try to do that most summers and get you ready for the fall coming up and get you situated with whatever that you need. So Craig, I'm going to stop sharing now.
That's fantastic. I'm just going to put up this last slide. Where are you? That's the one I wanted. All right. Thank you. This mentions Miles Brown. He wasn't with us today. He's usually my co-conspirator in these Discovery Days. But I am Craig Corey, one of the instructors. I've got a great set of team members here who deliver not just AWS training, many other services as well, platforms, architectures. But we would be happy with the links and information Sophia provided. Happy to help you with any of your training needs. Absolutely. And I wanted to make a quick note. Today's presentation is actually a nice summary of a 3-day migration class. So there is some hands-on, some labs to try out some of the services, but there is a 3-day class which goes into this detailed planning approach with a little more detail if you wish. And since she mentioned the different promotional offers here, it made me think too, majority of AWS training are 3-day classes, just so you understand that. But by all means, come to our website, have a look at what's being offered. It is the full AWS certified training selection. And we'd be happy to get you going on your AWS journey. I look forward to seeing any of you in training going forward. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate you spending the time with me today.
Thank you, Craig. Have a good one, everyone.